Imagine being the man asked to build the most dangerous machine in history. Not a sword that flashes in the sun, not a spear thrown in the heat of battle, not even a great siege tower meant to batter down walls. Instead, you are asked to build something far stranger, something that will decide the fate of thousands of lives without ever striking a single blow. You are not a king commanding armies, and you are not a hero sung about in epic poems. You are simply an engineer, a man who understands wood, weight, balance, and structure. Yet suddenly the future of an entire war rests in your hands, and the war itself has become a nightmare that refuses to end. For nearly 10 years the armies of the Greek world have gathered before the towering walls of Troy. 10 long years of marching, fighting, waiting, and dying beneath those massive stones. The city stands on the coast, proud and defiant, protected by walls so thick and so tall that they seem almost impossible to overcome. Generations of Trojans have believed those walls were built with the help of the gods themselves, and after a decade of failed assaults, it is beginning to feel as though that might be true. Every season has brought new attempts to break through the defenses, and every season has ended with the same result. The Greek army attacks, the Trojans defend. The battlefield fills with dust, shouting, clashing metal, and the cries of wounded men. Then the sun sets, the fighting stops, and the walls still stand exactly where they stood before. Thousands of warriors from across the Greek world have traveled here chasing glory and victory, but many of them now lie buried in the earth outside the city they could never conquer. The greatest champions of the age have fought beneath those gates. Heroes whose names echo through legend have tested their strength against the defenders of Troy. Among them is the unstoppable warrior Achilles, whose rage and skill on the battlefield have terrified enemies and inspired allies. When Achilles charges into battle, soldiers scatter like leaves in the wind, and yet even his fury cannot bring down the walls of the city. Another mighty fighter, Ajax the Great, has stood like a living fortress against the Trojan warriors, holding the line when others might have fled. He is a giant among men, carrying a shield so large it covers his entire body, and still the war remains locked in stalemate. On the Trojan side stands the noble defender Hector, the greatest champion of the city, a warrior who fights not for glory but for the survival of his people. He leads the defense from the front lines, protecting his homeland, his family, and the future of Troy itself. For years the war has revolved around these figures, heroes clashing in brutal duels that determine the outcome of battles, but never the outcome of the war itself. Each victory feels temporary, each loss feels meaningless, because no matter what happens on the battlefield, the walls remain untouched. The Greek camp stretches across the coastline like a temporary city built for soldiers who expected victory long ago. Thousands of tents fill the plains, cooking fires burn day and night, and ships line the shore waiting for the day they can finally sail home. But the mood in the camp has slowly changed over the years. In the beginning there was excitement, confidence, and the belief that Troy would fall quickly under the might of so many kings united together. Now there is frustration, exhaustion, and doubt. Men who once dreamed of glory now dream only of returning to their homes and families. Supplies must constantly be brought from distant lands, morale rises and falls like the tide, and commanders argue over strategies that never seem to work. Some believe the war has gone on too long to end in victory. Others believe the gods themselves are punishing the Greeks for their arrogance. Still others insist that one final effort will break the stalemate, though no one seems to know what that effort might be. Every day the soldiers wake to the same sight, the walls of Troy standing strong against the morning sky, as unbroken as they were a decade ago. Those walls dominate everything. They are not just a barrier of stone, but a symbol of the city, and oppose strength, and the Greeks, and oppose failure. Built high upon solid foundations, reinforced with towers and gates, they allow the defenders to watch every movement on the plains below. Archers can rain arrows down on attackers long before they reach the gates. Guards can sound alarms the moment an army begins to advance. Even if the Greeks manage to bring ladders or siege engines close to the walls, the Trojans can easily push them away or destroy them before they become a real threat. Over the years the attackers have tried nearly everything they can imagine. They have launched sudden assaults at dawn, hoping to catch the defenders unprepared. They have attacked at night, hoping darkness might hide their movements. They have attempted to weaken the walls with siege equipment and to starve the city by cutting off supplies. Yet Troy continues to survive. Its people remain confident behind their defenses, watching the Greek army struggle year after year. The war has become a test of endurance rather than strength, and it is beginning to seem as though the city might outlast its enemies forever. Within the Greek camp, commanders gather again and again to discuss what must be done. These men are kings, leaders who rule their own lands far across the sea, and they are not used to failure. Among them is Agamemnon, the powerful leader who brought the armies together in the first place. As the high commander of the Greek forces, he carries the burden of responsibility for the entire war. Every delay, every lost battle, every dead soldier weighs heavily on his decisions. He must find a way to end the conflict, yet every traditional strategy has already been tried. The commanders argue, debate, and sometimes blame one another for the stalemate. Pride, ambition, and rivalry complicate every discussion. Yet beneath all the disagreements lies the same terrifying truth: if nothing changes, the war may never end. For the ordinary soldiers in the camp, the endless conflict has become a harsh routine. Days are spent training, repairing equipment, and preparing for battles that lead nowhere. Nights are filled with stories, complaints, and memories of the homes they left behind. Some men arrived here as young warriors eager for glory, and now they are older, hardened by years of fighting with nothing to show for it except scars. They watch new recruits arrive and wonder if those men will also spend years staring at the same unbreakable walls. Hope fades slowly, replaced by the quiet fear that the war will consume their lives completely. Even the landscape seems tired of the conflict. The plains outside Troy have been trampled by thousands of marching feet, stained by countless battles, and filled with makeshift graves for fallen warriors. The sea beside the camp glitters in the sunlight, indifferent to the suffering of men, carrying ships back and forth across the horizon. Seasons pass, storms come and go, and still the war remains locked in place like a story that refuses to move forward. It is in this atmosphere of frustration and desperation that a new idea begins to spread among the Greek leaders. If 10 years of strength cannot break Troy, perhaps strength is not the answer. Perhaps the walls themselves are not the real problem. After all, the Trojans are protected not just by stone but by confidence. They believe their city cannot be conquered. They trust their defenses completely. What if that confidence could be turned against them? What if the Greeks could find a way to enter the city without fighting their way through the gates? Such thoughts are dangerous because they challenge the traditions of warfare that every commander understands. Armies are supposed to win through force, bravery, and open battle. Deception feels dishonorable to some, cowardly to others. Yet as the years drag on and the bodies continue to fall, the idea of trickery becomes harder and harder to ignore. Desperation has a way of opening minds to strategies that once seemed unthinkable. Somewhere among the commanders, the clever mind of Odysseus begins shaping a plan unlike anything the war has seen before. Odysseus is not known primarily for brute strength like Achilles or Ajax. Instead, he is famous for his intelligence, his ability to solve impossible problems through creativity and cunning. Throughout the war, he has proven again and again that clever thinking can be just as powerful as a sword. Now he begins to imagine a solution that does not rely on breaking the walls at all. Instead, it relies on convincing the Trojans to open those walls themselves. For most people in the camp, the idea sounds unbelievable at first, almost like a story meant to entertain soldiers around a fire rather than a real strategy for war. But the more the commanders think about it, the more they realize something important. After 10 years of fighting, the Trojans believe they understand the Greeks completely. They expect attacks, sieges, and battles. They do not expect a gift. They do not expect surrender. They certainly do not expect the Greek army to disappear. And that misunderstanding might be the very weakness the Greeks have been searching for. Yet turning such a strange concept into reality will require something that does not yet exist. It will require a structure so large and so convincing that the Trojans will accept it without suspicion. It will require engineering skill, precision, and careful planning. The idea is bold, but bold ideas are meaningless unless someone can build them. That is where you enter the story. While the heroes of the war have been fighting and the kings have been arguing over strategy, you have been working quietly among the craftsmen of the camp. Your knowledge of materials, measurements, and construction has helped maintain ships, repair siege equipment, and build the countless wooden structures the army relies upon. Until now, your work has been important but ordinary. Suddenly it becomes something else entirely. Because when the commanders decide they are willing to attempt deception instead of strength, they need someone capable of transforming imagination into reality. They need someone who understands how wood bends under pressure, how beams must be balanced to support weight, how hidden spaces can be created inside solid structures. In other words, they need an engineer. And the moment that decision is made, the entire course of the war begins to shift in a direction no soldier on the battlefield could have predicted. The war that once seemed trapped in endless repetition is about to move toward its most famous and most controversial turning point. And at the center of that turning point stands not a warrior raising a sword, but a builder preparing to create something the world will never forget. One evening, as the sun sinks slowly toward the horizon and the long shadows of the Greek camp stretch across the dusty plains outside the walls of Troy, a messenger arrives carrying an unusual request. The camp has seen countless messengers over the years, most bringing orders about supplies, troop movements, or battle preparations. But this message feels different from the moment it is delivered. It is not an order to prepare weapons, repair ships, or reinforce a siege engine. Instead, it is a request that sounds almost impossible when you first hear it. The clever strategist Odysseus has proposed a plan, and the commanders of the army want to speak with the craftsmen and engineers of the camp. The name Odysseus carries weight among the Greeks, not because he is the strongest warrior on the battlefield, but because his mind works in ways that others cannot easily predict. Throughout the war, he has solved problems that seemed unsolvable, whether through negotiation, trickery, or clever planning. Soldiers often say that if brute force fails, Odysseus will eventually find another way. Yet even for him, the idea now spreading through the camp sounds extraordinary. As word of the plan begins to circulate among officers and craftsmen, reactions range from confusion to disbelief. Some laugh quietly, assuming the strategist must be joking or speaking in metaphors rather than literal instructions. Others feel uneasy, sensing that if the commanders are seriously considering such a plan, then the war has truly reached a desperate stage. When you finally hear the details, the first thought that crosses your mind is simple: this cannot possibly work. The proposal is not to build another siege engine or a larger battering ram. It is not to design a tower capable of reaching the top of Troy and oppose massive walls. Instead, the plan calls for the construction of something that looks more like a monument or a piece of artwork than a weapon of war. Odysseus wants a giant wooden horse, not a statue carved for decoration, not a small symbolic figure meant to honor the gods, but an enormous structure towering above men and wagons alike. It must be large enough to dominate the battlefield visually, large enough to impress anyone who sees it from a distance, and large enough to serve a purpose that at first seems completely absurd. The horse must be hollow. Inside its massive body there must be enough space to hide a group of elite Greek warriors. These men will climb inside before the army abandons the battlefield. Once hidden, they will remain silent and motionless while the rest of the plan unfolds. The idea behind this strange construction begins to take shape as Odysseus explains his reasoning to the commanders. For 10 long years the Greeks have tried to defeat Troy through strength. They have attacked the gates, challenged the defenders in open battle, and tested the city and opposed defenses in every way imaginable. Each attempt has failed. The walls of Troy remain intact, the gates remain closed, and the Trojans continue to believe their city cannot be conquered. According to Odysseus, that belief is the key to everything. The Trojans are confident because they have survived a decade of attacks. They believe the Greeks are predictable enemies who will always fight openly and directly. What they do not expect is deception. What they do not expect is surrender. The plan therefore begins not with the horse itself, but with an illusion. The Greek army will pretend to give up the war entirely. Their tents will be burned, their camps dismantled, and their ships will sail away from the shore as though the army has finally accepted defeat. From the walls of Troy, the defenders will watch their enemies disappear across the sea. For the first time in 10 years, the battlefield will be silent. The Trojans will believe the long conflict has finally ended, but the Greeks will not truly leave. Instead, the fleet will hide nearby, waiting beyond the horizon where it cannot easily be seen from the city. The army will remain ready to return at a moment and oppose notice. The only thing left behind on the empty battlefield will be the giant wooden horse. Odysseus argues that the Trojans will not destroy it. Instead, they will see it as a trophy or a sacred offering. Perhaps they will believe the Greeks built it to honor the goddess Athena before leaving. Perhaps they will assume it represents some kind of ritual apology for the war. Whatever explanation they choose, the important thing is that they will bring the horse inside their city. Once the structure passes through the gates of Troy, the rest of the plan becomes terrifyingly simple. When night falls and the city sleeps, The hidden warriors will emerge from the horse. They will quietly eliminate the guards at the gates and open the city to the returning Greek army waiting offshore. In a single night, the city that resisted 10 years of warfare will fall from within. When the plan is explained in full, the silence that follows is heavy and uncertain. The commanders understand the brilliance of the idea, but they also see the enormous risks involved. Every part of the scheme depends on the Trojans behaving exactly as expected. If they suspect deception, the entire plan collapses instantly. If they decide to burn the horse rather than bring it inside the city, the hidden warriors will be trapped inside a blazing wooden prison. If the structure breaks while being moved, the soldiers hiding within will be exposed before the gates are even opened. Even if everything goes perfectly, the men hiding inside must remain silent and still for hours, perhaps even an entire day, while surrounded by enemies. Some commanders immediately reject the proposal, arguing that it relies too heavily on luck and psychological manipulation. They believe a true warrior should defeat his enemy openly, not through trickery. Others, however, recognize that the war has already reached a point where traditional honor has brought nothing but failure. 10 years of bravery have achieved nothing. 10 years of direct battle have not even cracked the walls of Troy. If victory is still possible, it may require a strategy unlike anything the Greeks have attempted before. Slowly, reluctantly, more and more leaders begin to support the idea. The risk is enormous, but the potential reward is even greater. If the plan works, the war will end immediately. The city that has resisted a decade of assault will collapse overnight. The soldiers will finally return home, and the kings will claim one of the most astonishing victories in history. Once the commanders decide to move forward, attention turns toward the practical problem that makes the entire plan possible or impossible. The horse must be built, and it cannot be an ordinary structure. It must be convincing enough to fool the Trojans, strong enough to hold warriors inside, and large enough to inspire awe rather than suspicion. That responsibility falls on the engineers and craftsmen of the Greek camp. For you, the moment feels surreal. Only hours earlier you were repairing equipment and supervising small construction projects like countless other days during the long war. Now you are being asked to design the centerpiece of a strategy that could end the conflict entirely. The pressure is immense because failure will not simply mean embarrassment or wasted materials. Failure could mean death for the men hiding inside the horse and disaster for the entire army. As you begin imagining how such a structure might be built, your mind immediately starts calculating sizes, weights, and materials. A horse is not an easy shape to construct on such a massive scale. The body must be wide enough to hold soldiers, yet balanced so it does not collapse under its own weight. The legs must support the entire structure without snapping or bending. The interior must contain hidden spaces while still appearing solid from the outside. Even the smallest mistake could cause the structure to break apart at the worst possible moment. Meanwhile, Odysseus continues refining the details of his plan with the commanders. The warriors chosen to hide inside the horse will be among the bravest and most disciplined in the army. They must remain silent no matter what happens outside. They must trust the plan completely, even when surrounded by enemies within the heart of the city. According to tradition, Odysseus himself will join them inside the horse, leading the group that will emerge once the gates of Troy are closed. The idea that such legendary warriors might hide inside a wooden structure rather than charging into battle feels almost unbelievable, yet the logic behind it is impossible to ignore. If strength cannot defeat Troy, then intelligence must find another path. As the night deepens and discussions continue, the atmosphere in the Greek camp changes. For the first time in years, there is a sense that the war might actually end. Soldiers whisper about the strange plans spreading among the commanders. Some dismiss it as a rumor or exaggeration, while others feel a mixture of excitement and fear. No one has ever attempted anything like this before. The outcome could be legendary triumph or catastrophic failure. Yet beneath all the uncertainty lies a growing realization that the war has reached its final stage. After 10 years of bloodshed, one last gamble may decide everything. And that gamble depends entirely on whether the impossible machine Odysseus has imagined can actually be built. The giant horse exists only as an idea for now, a daring vision formed in the mind of a strategist who believes deception can achieve what force could not. But soon that vision must take physical form. Wood must be cut, beams must be shaped, and the empty space inside the horse must be carefully designed to conceal the warriors who will change the fate of Troy forever. The plan may sound insane to many who hear it, but once the decision has been made, there is no turning back. The war that has dragged on for a decade is about to enter its most dangerous and unpredictable phase, and everything now depends on transforming a seemingly impossible concept into a real structure standing on the battlefield before the unbroken walls of Troy. Once the decision has been made, the idea that once sounded like madness begins to transform into a real task, and that task now belongs to you. The commanders have accepted the plan proposed by Odysseus, and the fate of the strategy now depends on whether the enormous structure he imagined can actually be built. For the warriors in the camp, preparation for battle usually means sharpening blades, repairing shields, and preparing armor. For you and the other craftsmen, preparation means something entirely different. It means gathering materials, measuring distances, cutting wood, and designing a structure that must perform perfectly under circumstances no one has ever attempted before. The first challenge is size. This cannot be a small sculpture or a simple wooden frame. The horse must be enormous, large enough to dominate the battlefield visually and convince the Trojans that it is a serious offering rather than a crude trick. If it is too small, they may see through the deception immediately. If it looks fragile or poorly constructed, they may decide it is worthless and destroy it rather than bringing it inside their city. The structure must inspire curiosity, awe, and perhaps even a sense of sacred mystery. That means every dimension must be carefully considered. You begin by sketching rough outlines in the dirt and on wooden tablets, calculating how tall the horse must stand and how wide its body must be to hold the warriors who will hide inside it. Estimates are made for how many men the plan requires. These cannot be ordinary soldiers chosen at random. They must be experienced fighters capable of staying silent and disciplined under extreme pressure. The interior chamber must therefore be large enough for a small group of elite warriors, each carrying weapons but limited in movement so the space remains hidden and secure. As the calculations grow more detailed, you realize that the horse must be far larger than anyone first imagined. Its body will have to rise high above the ground, tall enough to appear monumental while also creating space inside its hollow frame. The legs must support tremendous weight, not only from the wooden body but from the men hiding inside. The neck and head must extend upward in a way that makes the structure look convincing while still maintaining balance. Every part must work together as a single system of support. Once the general dimensions are determined, the next question is materials. The plains outside the walls of Troy do not offer endless resources, but the Greek camp has access to timber from nearby forests and wood taken from damaged ships that can no longer sail. Large beams are selected first because the internal frame must be incredibly strong. These beams will form the skeleton of the horse, much like the bones inside a living animal. If the skeleton fails, the entire structure collapses. Workers begin cutting thick logs and shaping them into straight supports. The sound of axes and saws fills the air as teams of craftsmen labor day after day. Large beams are joined together using wooden pegs, rope bindings, and carefully carved joints designed to distribute weight evenly. The interior frame slowly begins to take shape on the ground. Massive supports form the base of the horse and apos body, creating a strong platform that will eventually carry the hidden chamber inside. From there, vertical beams rise upward to define the shape of the torso. Cross braces are added between them to prevent bending and twisting under pressure. The structure begins to resemble a strange wooden cage, an empty skeleton waiting to be filled with walls and details. Every measurement must be precise because even a small imbalance could make the horse unstable once it stands upright. The legs are particularly difficult to design. Each leg must be thick and reinforced, capable of supporting not only the weight of the body but also the shifting movement that will occur when the structure is dragged across the ground. Because the horse must eventually be moved, the base must include hidden supports and possibly wheels or rollers that allow the Trojans to pull it without realizing how carefully engineered it truly is. Too much weight concentrated in one place could cause a leg to snap or tilt. Too little support could cause the entire body to lean dangerously. For days you and the other builders test different arrangements of beams, adjusting the internal frame again and again until the balance feels right. At the same time, another critical problem demands attention: the hidden chamber. The warriors must be able to enter the horse before the army pretends to abandon the battlefield, and once inside they must remain concealed until nightfall after the horse is brought into the city. That means the interior space must allow them to sit or crouch for long periods without making noise. It must also provide just enough air for them to breathe while remaining invisible from outside. Designing such a chamber requires careful thought. The walls cannot be solid blocks of wood because the men inside would quickly suffocate, yet visible holes would immediately reveal the deception. The solution is subtle ventilation. Small openings are carved between decorative patterns in the outer panels, hidden in ways that allow air to flow without appearing suspicious. These openings are scattered across different parts of the horse so the interior remains breathable without drawing attention. Inside the frame, a platform is built where the warriors will sit or crouch. Wooden supports are arranged to hold their weight while preventing them from accidentally pressing against the outer walls. The chamber must remain quiet no matter how the structure moves. Even a small creak could reveal the truth if someone outside listens closely. Another challenge is the entrance. The warriors need a way to climb inside before the plan begins, but once the horse stands on the battlefield, the entrance must disappear completely. You design a hidden door within the side of the horse and Apos body. From the outside it appears to be just another wooden panel forming part of the animal in Apos shape. Hinges and latches are carefully concealed so the door can open silently when needed but remain undetectable from a distance. The mechanism must be simple and reliable because once the warriors are inside, there will be no opportunity to repair or adjust it. If the door fails to open when the time comes, the entire plan will collapse. As the internal structure becomes more complete, the outer shell begins to form. Planks of wood are attached to the frame to create the smooth shape of the horse and Apos body. Craftsmen carve curved pieces to imitate the muscles and contours of a real animal. The goal is not perfect artistic beauty but convincing appearance. Anyone seeing the structure from outside should immediately recognize the form of a horse without noticing the hidden complexity within. The head and neck present a special challenge because they must rise high above the body while remaining balanced. Additional braces are placed inside the neck to prevent it from bending or breaking. The head itself is carved with bold features so it can be seen clearly even from a distance. Some craftsmen add decorative patterns that might make the structure appear like a ceremonial offering rather than a war machine. While construction continues, the chosen warriors begin preparing for their role in the plan. Among them is Odysseus himself, determined to share the risk with the men who will hide inside the horse. These soldiers understand that their mission is unlike any battle they have fought before. Instead of charging across the battlefield with weapons raised, they will sit in darkness, silent and motionless, trusting that the deception will succeed. Their courage must be different from the courage of open combat. It must be the patience to wait and the discipline to remain unseen even when surrounded by enemies. As days pass, the massive structure begins to dominate the Greek camp. Workers climb ladders to attach planks high along the horse and Apos sides. Ropes and pulleys lift heavy beams into place. From a distance, the construction site looks almost like a small fortress made of wood. Soldiers walking past cannot help staring at it, wondering whether this strange creation will truly end the war. The sheer scale of the horse becomes clear as it rises higher and higher. Standing beside its legs, a man feels small compared to the towering body above him. The structure is large enough to hide not just a few warriors but an entire story of deception within its wooden walls. Yet even as it nears completion, doubts remain in many minds. What if the Trojans refuse to bring the horse into their city? What if they burn it as a precaution? What if they examine it closely enough to discover the hidden chamber? These questions haunt the builders as much as the commanders. Every joint must be secure, every panel must fit perfectly, because the success of the plan depends on the horse appearing both mysterious and harmless at the same time. Finally, after countless hours of labor, adjustments, and careful testing, the structure stands complete. The giant wooden horse towers over the camp like something out of a legend. Its massive legs support a hollow body strong enough to carry the hidden warriors. Its carved head rises proudly above the battlefield, visible even from the distant walls of Troy. From the outside it appears to be exactly what Odysseus intended, a monumental offering, impressive yet strangely silent. But within its carefully constructed frame lies the secret that could destroy an entire city. And as you step back to examine the finished work, you realize that the machine you helped create is unlike anything the world has ever seen, a weapon not of blades or fire but of patience, deception, and human ingenuity, waiting for the moment when the gates of Troy finally close behind it. The day finally arrives when the long and dangerous plan must move from preparation to reality, and the atmosphere across the Greek camp feels different from any other day in the 10 long years of war. For years the soldiers of the Greek alliance have woken to the same routine of training, waiting, and preparing for battles that never quite brought victory. Now the camp buzzes with quiet urgency as orders are passed from commander to commander. The giant wooden horse stands completed on the plain before the walls of Troy, towering over the landscape like a silent monument to a gamble that could end everything. The structure is far larger than anything the Trojans have seen before on the battlefield, and even the Greek soldiers who built it cannot help staring at it with a mixture of pride and unease. It looks almost alive in the early morning light, its enormous wooden frame casting long shadows across the dusty ground. Inside that massive hollow body, a small group of elite warriors prepares for the most unusual mission of their lives. Among them is the mastermind of the entire plan, Odysseus, a man whose reputation for cleverness has brought the war to this moment. These warriors check their weapons carefully, though they know they will not use them for many hours. Their swords are sharp, their armor is secured as quietly as possible, and their expressions are serious as they prepare to climb into the cramped chamber hidden inside the horse. Once the plan begins, there will be no turning back. If the Trojans discover the truth while the men are still trapped inside the structure, there will be no escape. Yet none of the chosen warriors hesitate. They understand that their courage must now take a different form than the courage shown in open battle. Instead of charging forward beneath the sun with shields raised and voices shouting war cries, they must sit in darkness and silence, trusting that the deception will succeed. One by one they climb the concealed ladder that leads through the hidden door in the side of the horse. The entrance panel is carefully opened just wide enough to allow each warrior to slip inside. As they enter the chamber, they arrange themselves on the narrow wooden platform designed for this very purpose. The space is tight, forcing them to sit close together with barely enough room to move. Weapons are held carefully to prevent clattering against the wooden walls. When the last warrior has entered, the hidden door is closed and secured from within. From the outside, the structure now appears completely solid, nothing more than an enormous wooden statue standing alone on the battlefield. Meanwhile, across the Greek camp, preparations for the great deception begin. Soldiers dismantle tents, gather supplies, and prepare the ships for departure. Fires are deliberately set to burn parts of the camp so that smoke rises into the sky, creating the appearance of a hurried retreat. Wagons creak as equipment is loaded, and the sound of marching feet spreads across the shoreline. To anyone watching from the walls of Troy, it looks exactly like the end of a long and exhausting war. For 10 years the Greeks have stood before the city, and now it seems as though they have finally given up. The fleet of ships begins moving out into the water, sails catching the wind as they slowly disappear toward the horizon. From high atop the walls, Trojan watchers observe every movement with cautious curiosity. The sudden change is difficult to understand. After so many years of relentless conflict, the enemy appears to be leaving without one final battle. Some Trojan soldiers remain suspicious, scanning the plains carefully for signs of a trap, but the evidence seems convincing. The camp that once held thousands of warriors now lies abandoned, its fires still smoldering, its tents reduced to ash. Only one strange object remains on the empty battlefield, the giant wooden horse. For hours the Trojans watch from the safety of their walls, waiting to see if the Greek army will return. The ships grow smaller and smaller in the distance until they vanish completely beyond the horizon. The plain falls quiet in a way it has not been quiet for an entire decade. No battle cries echo through the air, no marching armies approach the gates, and no arrows fly between the two sides. Slowly, cautiously, groups of Trojan soldiers begin to venture out from the city to investigate what has been left behind. They move carefully at first, weapons ready, scanning the abandoned camp for hidden enemies. But they find nothing. The tents are empty, the equipment has been taken, and the only object standing on the plain is the enormous wooden horse. As the soldiers approach it, they cannot help staring in amazement. The structure is far larger than they expected, its massive wooden legs planted firmly on the ground and its carved head rising proudly above them. Word spreads quickly through the city, and soon crowds gather around the strange monument. Men, women, and children come out through the gates to see the mysterious gift left behind by their former enemies. Some people laugh in disbelief, unable to imagine why the Greeks would construct such a massive object only to abandon it. Others speculate that it must be some kind of offering to the gods, perhaps meant to apologize for the destruction and suffering caused by the long war. A few voices whisper that it might even be a tribute to the goddess Athena, whose favor both sides of the conflict have sought at different times. Yet not everyone feels comfortable with the strange sight before them. Among the Trojans stands a priest named Laocoön, a man who senses danger where others see victory. He watches the crowd gather around the giant horse, his expression dark with suspicion. To him, the sudden disappearance of the Greek army feels too convenient, too easy after 10 years of relentless fighting. He raises his voice to warn the people around him that the enemy cannot be trusted, even when they appear to surrender. According to the ancient stories, Laocoön famously declares that one should beware of Greeks even when they bring gifts. His warning echoes across the gathering crowd, creating a ripple of unease among those listening. Some Trojans begin to reconsider their excitement, wondering if the priest might be right. The Greeks have proven themselves cunning in the past, and the idea of a hidden trap cannot be dismissed entirely. Determined to prove his suspicions, Laocoön steps forward and lifts a heavy spear. With a powerful throw, he hurls the weapon directly into the side of the wooden horse. The spear strikes the thick planks with a sharp, echoing sound that carries across the silent plain. For a brief moment, everything freezes. The crowd stares at the spear embedded in the wood, waiting to see what might happen next. Inside the hollow chamber of the horse, the hidden Greek warriors feel the vibration as the spear pierces the outer wall. In the darkness, they hold their breath, terrified that the weapon might have struck one of them or revealed the empty space inside. Yet the spear does not penetrate far enough to expose the secret. It remains lodged in the outer layer of wood, leaving the chamber hidden behind the thick internal structure designed to protect it. Outside, the Trojans examine the horse more closely. Some begin arguing about what should be done with it. A few suggest burning it immediately to remove any possibility of danger. Others believe destroying it might offend the gods if it truly is a sacred offering. The debate grows louder as different opinions clash. Meanwhile, the sun begins to sink lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the battlefield. Just when uncertainty seems to be growing, something unexpected happens that changes the mood of the entire crowd. According to the legends told for centuries afterward, strange sea serpents suddenly rise from the water near the shore. The creatures move swiftly across the sand, terrifying the Trojans who witness the event. They coil around the priest Laocoön and his sons, crushing them in a violent struggle before disappearing again into the sea. The horrifying spectacle leaves the crowd shocked and frightened. Many Trojans interpret the event as a sign from the gods themselves. In their minds, the death of Laocoön is punishment for his attempt to destroy what may have been a sacred object. Fear and superstition quickly overwhelm the earlier doubts. Instead of viewing the horse as a possible trap, many people now believe it must be honored rather than destroyed. The mood shifts dramatically as the Trojans decide the giant horse should be brought inside the city as a symbol of victory and divine favor. Ropes are gathered, and teams of men begin preparing to move the massive structure. The process is slow and difficult, requiring great effort as the enormous horse creaks and rolls across the ground toward the gates of Troy. Inside the hidden chamber, the Greek warriors feel every jolt and movement as the structure is dragged forward. The sound of cheering voices and straining ropes echoes through the wooden walls as the Trojans celebrate what they believe is the end of the war. At last, the giant horse passes through the gates of the city that has resisted the Greek army for a decade. The massive doors close behind it, sealing Troy off from the outside world. Night approaches slowly, and the city prepares to celebrate its apparent victory, unaware that within the towering wooden monument standing in its streets lies the quiet beginning of its destruction. As darkness slowly settles over the city of Troy, the mood within the walls is unlike anything the Trojans have felt in many years. For nearly a decade, their lives have revolved around the presence of the Greek army outside their gates. Every morning they woke knowing the enemy was still there, still waiting, still hoping to break through the defenses that protected their homes and families. But now the plain outside the city is silent. The fires of the Greek camp are gone, the tents have vanished, and the ships that once filled the shoreline have disappeared beyond the horizon. To the people of Troy, the long and exhausting war finally seems to be over. The giant wooden horse now standing within the city has become the center of attention, a mysterious monument brought inside the walls as a symbol of victory and perhaps even divine favor. Crowds gathered around it earlier in the day, examining its massive legs and towering body, marveling at the strange gift left behind by their former enemies. Now, as evening approaches, the streets gradually empty as families return to their homes and celebrations begin throughout the city. Fires are lit for cooking, wine flows freely, and the tension that once filled the air slowly fades. Soldiers who have spent years standing guard along the walls finally allow themselves to relax, believing that the greatest threat to their city has sailed away forever. Yet hidden within the enormous wooden structure standing quietly in the streets are the warriors who know the truth about what is about to happen. Inside the hollow chamber built within the horse, a group of elite Greek fighters sits in darkness and silence. Among them is the clever strategist Odysseus, whose daring plan has brought them into the heart of the enemy city without a single battle being fought that day. The cramped interior space forces the men to remain close together, their backs pressed against wooden supports, their weapons held carefully to avoid making noise. Hours pass slowly as they wait, listening to the distant sounds of the city around them. At times they hear laughter, music, and voices drifting through the streets outside, signs that the Trojans are celebrating what they believe is the end of the war. At other moments the sounds fade into quiet murmurs as the city gradually prepares for sleep. For the men inside the horse, time feels strangely stretched. They must remain completely still, even when their legs begin to ache from sitting in the cramped position for so long. They must remain silent, even when the noise outside grows loud enough to remind them how close they are to discovery. Every creak of the wooden structure, every shifting movement of the horse as it settles on the ground, makes their hearts race with fear that someone outside might hear something unusual. Yet the construction has been strong and careful. The thick beams and layered planks hide the chamber perfectly, preventing the Trojans from noticing the hidden space within. As night deepens, the streets of Troy slowly grow quieter. The celebrations fade, replaced by the natural stillness that comes when a city falls asleep. Lamps are extinguished one by one in the windows of houses, and the last wandering voices disappear into distant alleys. Guards remain posted at the gates and along the walls, but even they feel less alert than usual after the long years of war appear to have ended. Many of them have spent the evening talking about the departure of the Greeks, wondering whether the ships might truly be gone for good. None of them suspect that the enemy is already inside the city. Inside the horse, the waiting warriors listen carefully for the moment they have been anticipating all day. Eventually the silence outside becomes deep and steady, broken only by the occasional distant sound of footsteps or the soft rustling of night wind through the streets. Odysseus knows the time has come. Slowly and carefully he signals to the other men that they must prepare to move. The hidden door built into the side of the horse must be opened without making the slightest noise. Hands move cautiously in the darkness as the concealed latch is released. The wooden panel shifts gently, revealing a narrow opening through which the warriors can finally see the night sky of Troy. One by one they climb down from the horse, dropping quietly onto the ground beneath the enormous structure that carried them into the city. Their movements are swift but silent, each man aware that the success of the entire plan depends on avoiding detection. Once all the warriors have emerged from the horse, they gather briefly in the shadows to confirm their next actions. Their first objective is the city gates. If they can eliminate the guards and open those massive doors, the Greek army waiting offshore will be able to enter the city without resistance. Moving through the dark streets, the warriors spread out in small groups. The layout of Troy is unfamiliar to them, but they have studied what little information the Greeks gathered during the long war. They know roughly where the gates are located and how the guards rotate their watch during the night. The city that once felt impossible to enter now lies vulnerable from within. As they approach the gates, they spot the small group of Trojan guards standing watch. These soldiers have spent years defending their city against attack, but tonight they are tired and relaxed, convinced that the war has ended. The sudden appearance of armed Greeks in the darkness catches them completely by surprise. The hidden warriors strike quickly and efficiently, overwhelming the guards before they have time to raise an alarm. The clash is brief and deadly, finished within moments. With the guards eliminated, the Greeks turn their attention to the massive gates themselves. These enormous wooden doors have protected Troy from countless assaults over the years. From the outside they were nearly impossible to breach. But from the inside, with no defenders remaining to stop them, they can be opened. With careful effort, the warriors begin unlocking the heavy mechanisms that hold the gates shut. The great doors slowly swing open, revealing the dark plain beyond the city walls. Far out on the water, hidden behind a nearby island, the Greek fleet has been waiting patiently for the signal. The ships that seemed to abandon the battlefield earlier in the day never truly left. Instead, they remained close enough to return quickly once the moment arrived. As the gates of Troy open, One of the warriors lights a signal fire high on the walls where it can be seen from the sea. The flame burns brightly against the night sky, announcing that the plan has succeeded. When the Greek commanders aboard the waiting ships see the signal, they waste no time. The fleet begins moving toward the shore once again, sails catching the night wind as the vessels race back toward the city that believed itself safe only hours earlier. Thousands of Greek soldiers prepare to disembark, ready to enter Troy through the open gates created by the small group of warriors who hid inside the horse. Back within the city, the first signs of chaos begin to appear as the returning army pours through the gates. The quiet streets that only moments ago held sleeping citizens suddenly fill with the sounds of marching feet, shouting voices, and clashing weapons. Greek soldiers spread rapidly through the city, attacking guards, seizing control of key locations, and opening additional gates to allow even more troops inside. The people of Troy wake in confusion and terror as the realization spreads that the enemy they believed gone has returned in the dead of night. Fires begin to appear in different parts of the city as houses and buildings are set ablaze during the assault. The glow of flames reflects against the ancient walls that had protected Troy for generations. Panic spreads among the inhabitants as families try desperately to escape the violence unfolding in the streets. The Trojan defenders attempt to rally, but the sudden attack from within the city makes organized resistance almost impossible. The same walls that once protected them now trap them inside with the invading army. What 10 years of open warfare could not accomplish has happened in a single night. The city that once seemed unconquerable has fallen to deception. By dawn, the legendary city of Troy lies in ruins, its long resistance finally ended by the daring plan that began with the construction of a giant wooden horse and the courage of the warriors who waited inside it for the moment to strike. As the first light of dawn spreads slowly across the sky above the ruined city of Troy, the scale of what has happened during the night begins to reveal itself. Only hours earlier the streets were filled with celebration, music, and relief as the people believed the long war had finally ended. Now the city looks completely different. Smoke rises from burned buildings, broken weapons lie scattered across the ground, and the sounds of battle have faded into the heavy silence that follows destruction. The walls that protected Troy for generations still stand tall against the morning sky, but they no longer represent safety or strength. Instead, they enclose a city that has fallen from within. Greek soldiers move through the streets, securing the last remaining areas of resistance and gathering together after the long and chaotic night. For many of them, the victory feels almost unreal. They spent 10 exhausting years staring at these walls from the outside, believing they might never break through them. Yet now they walk through the heart of the city itself, the gates standing open behind them because of a daring plan that relied not on strength but on deception. Among those moving through the city are the warriors who hid inside the wooden horse, the small group whose patience and discipline allowed the entire strategy to succeed. At their center stands the clever strategist Odysseus, whose imagination transformed the hopeless stalemate of the war into one of the most famous acts of trickery in all of history. Many soldiers praise his intelligence, recognizing that without his idea the war might have continued for many more years. Yet even as the commanders and warriors discuss the victory, few people speak about another crucial figure in the story. The plan itself required more than clever thinking. It required a structure so enormous and convincing that the Trojans would believe it was real. Without that structure, the deception would have failed before it even began. The giant horse that once stood proudly within the city is still there, towering above the surrounding streets like a silent witness to the events of the night. Its massive wooden legs remain planted firmly on the ground, and its carved head still rises above the rooftops. But now everyone understands what it truly was. It was not a sacred offering or a symbol of surrender. It was a machine of war unlike any other, designed to hide danger inside something that looked harmless. For centuries afterward, people would remember the image of that horse more clearly than the names of most warriors who fought in the war. The phrase Trojan horse would eventually become a symbol used in many different contexts, always referring to the same idea, something that appears to be a gift or a harmless object but secretly hides a threat within it. Yet the story most often focuses on the clever strategist who imagined the plan or the warriors who climbed out of the horse during the night to open the gates. Rarely does the story linger on the individual whose skills turned imagination into reality, because before the deception could work, someone had to build the horse itself. Creating such a structure required far more than simple carpentry. It demanded knowledge of engineering, balance, and structural design. The horse had to be large enough to inspire awe among the Trojans, but strong enough to support its own enormous weight. It had to contain a hidden chamber capable of holding armed warriors without collapsing or revealing its secret. It had to be designed so that air could reach the men hiding inside while remaining invisible from the outside. Even the hidden door through which the warriors escaped during the night had to function perfectly at the most critical moment. If any part of the construction had failed, the entire plan might have ended in disaster. If the internal frame had been too weak, the horse might have collapsed while the Trojans were dragging it through the gates. If the ventilation had been poorly designed, the warriors might have suffocated before they ever had the chance to act. If the hidden door had jammed, the men trapped inside could have been discovered by morning. The success of the strategy depended just as much on the reliability of the structure as it did on the courage of the soldiers or the cleverness of the plan. Yet the name of the engineer who designed and supervised the construction rarely appears in the legends told afterward. History often celebrates dramatic moments and heroic figures, but it sometimes forgets the people who worked quietly behind the scenes to make those moments possible. In the case of the Trojan horse, the image of the towering wooden structure survived in stories for thousands of years, while the identity of the person who built it faded into the background. This does not mean the engineer and Apas' role was unimportant. In fact, it was essential. Without the precise measurements, the carefully arranged beams, and the hidden chamber designed to hold the warriors, the horse would have been nothing more than a decorative statue. Instead, it became the key to ending one of the most famous wars in mythology. When historians and storytellers later tried to reconstruct the events of the war, they often focused on the dramatic heroes whose names appeared in epic poems. Figures like Achilles, Hector, and Odysseus dominated the narrative because their actions were bold and easy to imagine. But the creation of the horse represents a different kind of achievement. It represents the power of human ingenuity, the ability to solve a seemingly impossible problem through creativity and careful planning rather than brute force. The fall of Troy therefore serves as a reminder that history is shaped not only by warriors and kings, but also by builders, thinkers, and problem solvers. The engineer who helped design the horse may not have fought in the final battle, yet his work made that battle possible. Every beam placed inside the structure, every hidden support added to strengthen the frame, and every detail designed to conceal the chamber contributed directly to the success of the mission. The moment when the warriors opened the gates of Troy began long before they climbed down from the horse. It began when the first piece of timber was measured and cut on the plains outside the city. Over time, the story of the Trojan horse spread far beyond the world where it first took place. Ancient poets and historians told the tale again and again, passing it down through generations. Artists painted scenes of the giant horse being dragged through the gates of Troy. Writers described the moment when the hidden warriors emerged in the darkness to open the city to the waiting army. The image became one of the most enduring symbols in all of mythology. Even in the modern world, the concept of a Trojan horse continues to appear in different forms. In technology and computer security, the term unquote Trojan horse unquote is used to describe malicious software that disguises itself as something harmless in order to enter a system undetected. Just like the ancient story, it relies on deception rather than direct attack. The fact that the idea still exists thousands of years later shows how powerful the original concept was. It represents a universal truth about strategy. Sometimes the most effective way to defeat an enemy is not through overwhelming strength but through intelligence and creativity. Yet behind that concept lies the quiet story of construction, planning, and engineering. The giant wooden horse did not simply appear on the battlefield as a finished masterpiece. It was built piece by human hands. It required effort, patience, and skill to transform the daring idea of Odysseus into a physical object capable of fooling an entire city. The fall of Troy may have happened in a single dramatic night, but the foundation of that victory was laid long before the gates opened. In that sense, the engineer who helped build the horse played a role just as important as the warriors who fought the final battle. His work demonstrates that sometimes the most powerful weapons in history are not swords or spears but ideas brought to life through careful design. When people imagine the Trojan horse today, they usually picture the enormous wooden structure standing before the gates of Troy, surrounded by curious Trojans who believe they are witnessing the end of a long war. They picture the warriors hidden inside, waiting silently for the moment when darkness will allow them to act. But few stop to imagine the person who stood beside that structure when it was first completed, examining the beams and supports, making sure every piece fit together exactly as intended. That moment, quiet and unnoticed, may have been just as important as the dramatic scenes that followed. Because once the horse stood ready on the battlefield, the fate of Troy had already begun to change. The war that seemed endless had reached its turning point, not through a final charge of heroes, but through the careful work of someone who understood how to build a machine capable of winning a war without ever swinging a sword. The story of the Trojan horse does not end with the fall of Troy or the triumph of the Greek army. It continues in the imaginations, legends, and lessons that have survived for thousands of years. And in understanding the story fully, one must consider the perspective of the engineer who built it, the man whose hands shaped the beams, whose mind calculated every support and brace, and whose meticulous attention to detail ensured that the structure would serve its hidden purpose, because without his contribution the brilliant strategy of Odysseus might have failed, and the city would have remained unconquered. And yet history rarely names him, leaving only the outline of his genius in the massive horse itself, which stood silent and imposing on the plain before Troy, and then within its walls, a symbol of cunning, patience, and ingenuity, demonstrating that victory in war is not always achieved through strength and numbers alone, but also through foresight, engineering, and the ability to transform an idea into a tangible, functional object. And as one imagines the countless hours he must have spent planning the dimensions, testing the weight distribution, calculating how many men could fit inside without compromising the horse and apost's stability, designing the hidden compartments, and ensuring ventilation for those hidden within, it becomes clear that his role was both creative and critical, combining technical skill with the strategic vision of someone who understood that the success of a military plan could hinge entirely on the reliability of a single constructed object. And one can picture him standing back from the work at every stage, scrutinizing the skeleton of the horse, adjusting beams, reinforcing joints, overseeing the placement of planks to ensure the outer shape was convincing yet discreet, the hidden hatch perfectly concealed, and the inner chamber capable of sustaining life, even in the darkness, under the pressure of being inside a deceptively static wooden statue while the rest of the Greek army executed their illusion of retreat. And the courage required to build such a structure was different from that required on the battlefield, for the stakes were high in a quiet, almost invisible way, and the success or failure of his craft would determine the fate of thousands, because if a single miscalculation had been made, a weak joint, a misaligned beam, a door that did not open smoothly, the men hiding inside might have suffocated, discovered, or been trapped, leading to the immediate collapse of the plan. And as one contemplates the engineering challenges, one must consider the materials available, the rough and heavy timber that needed to be shaped, joined, and balanced to form a massive structure that could withstand both the weight of its hidden occupants and the strain of being moved across uneven terrain into the heart of an enemy city. And all of this without the modern tools and machines that we take for granted, meaning that every cut, every peg, every brace required human strength, precision, and ingenuity. And he would have had to calculate the horse and apost's center of gravity, its ability to stand without tipping, the spacing of internal supports to distribute weight evenly, and the strength of its legs to bear enormous pressure, all while ensuring that the exterior looked plausible and enticing to the Trojans, blending the practical with the deceptive, the functional with the symbolic, for it had to appear to be a gift worthy of awe rather than suspicion. And when one imagines the men climbing into the hidden chamber at night, knowing that their lives depended on the perfection of his work, one can feel the silent tension that must have accompanied the final moments of construction, the responsibility that weighed on his shoulders like the heavy beams themselves. And yet he must have maintained calm and confidence, understanding that his expertise could turn the tide of a war that had lasted a decade, because the Trojan horse was not just wood shaped into the form of a horse. It was a masterclass in strategic engineering, an embodiment of human ingenuity in service of a plan that combined psychology, deception, and precise execution. And as the Greeks feigned retreat, the plain emptied of tents and soldiers, the horse standing alone like an enigmatic monument, it was his craft that transformed a brilliant idea into a reality capable of deceiving an entire city. Debated whether to bring the horse within their walls, when some voices called for caution while others urged reverence, the structure itself, silent yet imposing, was a testament to the perfection of his work, for it communicated awe and significance without a single word, convincing observers that it was a sacred object rather than a lethal trap. and as the horse was dragged through the streets, each movement sending faint creaks through the wooden skeleton, he would have known that if calculations were being tested in real time, that the equilibrium he had designed was holding under pressure, and that every joint, every brace, and every hidden support was proving its worth as the city unknowingly welcomed the very instrument of its downfall. And then, in the dark of night, when Odysseus and his men emerged from the chamber to open the gates, the engineer and epos work had achieved its ultimate purpose, enabling the Greek army to enter Troy without a single large-scale assault, accomplishing in hours what brute force had failed to achieve for 10 years. And the success of this moment underscores the silent heroism inherent in creation and preparation, the fact that wars and victories often hinge on those who build, calculate, and plan behind the scenes, whose ingenuity is as critical as the courage of warriors, and whose contribution, though rarely recognized in myths and songs, is preserved in the enduring symbol of the horse itself, which has become a metaphor for strategic thinking and hidden potential across centuries, reminding humanity that triumph often belongs to those who combine intellect, skill, and creativity to achieve what seems impossible. And as we reflect on the Trojan horse today, it is impossible not to acknowledge the invisible hands that shaped history, for the engineer who built the horse embodies the idea that vision paired with execution can alter the course of events, that careful thought, precision, and unwavering dedication can produce results that echo across time, leaving a legacy that is as much about human ingenuity as it is about military strategy. And in contemplating the story, one realizes that every beam, every joint, every hidden compartment inside that massive wooden horse is a testament to foresight, skill, and the extraordinary ability of a single individual to translate abstract ideas into reality, ultimately changing the fate of a city, shaping legend, and inspiring generations to come with a silent, enduring example of genius in action. And it is in this recognition that the true depth of the Trojan horse story comes to life, revealing not only the brilliance of strategy and courage of warriors, but the quiet, meticulous artistry and engineering brilliance of the man whose hands and mind built a vessel of deception capable of altering history forever, leaving behind a tale that continues to captivate imaginations, teach lessons about ingenuity, caution, and creativity, and immortalize profound impact one individual can have when skill meets vision and determination under circumstances that demand nothing less than perfection.